Hi, my name is Bryan Singh.
Hi, I'm Crista Castro.
We're the married couple behind Fear the Spotlight. My background is actually in AAA games. So before working on Fear the Spotlight, I worked at Naughty Dog on games like Uncharted and The Last of Us. And before that, I worked on Journey for the PS3.
Before making this game, I was working in TV animation, so cartoon shows, and at companies like Nickelodeon and Warner Brothers. So I was working there for about 8 years. After pandemic, we we always had dreamed about making games, and it seemed like a good time since we were both working from home. We were both reevaluating what we wanted to do in life, and so we made the jump and made our own company and made our game.
We had some savings, so we had about 2 years to figure out what we were doing and come up with a game idea, and that ultimately became Fear the Spotlight. Krista's a huge fan of horror movies and horror in general, and she like pulled me into the hobby and made me a fan of horror as well. So making a horror game was like a natural fit for us because we were playing just so much at the time. And we spent 2 years making Fear the Spotlight until we thought we were done. We had, reached our deadline. And when we released that version of the game, we were kind of preparing to go back to real jobs to find jobs again. But we were discovered by Blumhouse, the movie production company. They were getting into games and they liked our game, so they asked us if they could help do anything with our game. And they ended up funding a third year of development, and we became the first game to be launched under their publishing label. So Fear the Spotlight is the debut game. I guess not only is it our debut game as like full-time indies, but it's the debut game of Blumhouse Games, the horror games indie publishing label. We keep describing it as our love letter to horror. It's all the things we love about horror games and horror movies, which tends to be like slower, atmospheric, creepy, but also sweet and emotional. Um, you follow these two girls, Amy and Vivian, that break into their high school while it's closed to do a seance with a spirit board, and things go wrong because that's a terrible idea. And so you playing as Vivian, start to look for your friend Amy who has gone missing. And then, along the way, you're facing yourself, facing your fears, discovering some past mystery of a disaster that happened in the school, and hopefully finding your friend Amy at the end of the day.
I'm a huge fan of horror and grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. So it was just a lot of things that influenced me growing up as a kid. So early PlayStation games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil. But then movies like The Craft, shows like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Those are things that we were kind of pulling from and we both remembered experiencing. And even later, as you get into the game, J horror like The Ring, games like Fatal Frame, those are things that like as I remembered really scaring me as when I grew up. So I thought it would be fun to pull from my own fears and put it into a game.
Yeah, I think of Feel the Spotlight as a love letter to horror in not just like the obvious retro inspirations, but also our modern inspirations of horror. Because I grew up playing just tons of games, like any video game I can remember. And so I played Resident Evil and Silent Hill as a kid, not as a horror fan, but just as a video game fan. But those definitely stuck with me. And then as an adult, when Krista was introducing me to how far horror has come, um, we watched movies like The Conjuring, where I kind of learned that horror can be just really fun. Like it can be scary, but it can also be a bit of a roller coaster, and um, you can just go along for the ride. The game that we made, it has the obvious sort of PlayStation inspired look to it, and it fits the format of like a Resident Evil or a Silent Hill. But we tried to modernize it in a lot of ways by making the controls really easy to play, but also trying to make it just a fun roller coaster of a ride. Even though our game is a slow, tense atmospheric game, you're always seeing something new and there's always something unexpected around the corner. So we do think of it as a roller coaster in a way.
This love story is really just something we both related to. Like, I think Vivian and Amy as characters, they both feel out of place. They don't feel like they belong, and they have trouble finding people that they connect with, and that they finally found someone that they feel that they have this beautiful connection with. It's very rare, and it was just very relatable as we were writing the story. There's just so much of us in these characters. Um, it's just something that came out when we were writing it. It didn't feel like it was something that needed to be so poignant, but it's just like both of ourselves into it.
Yeah, I think when we decided to make this game, it wasn't so calculated. It really was just putting all of our favorite things into one game. Um, and as we were making the game and the setting and the genre, we started to discover who these characters were, and we couldn't help but put ourselves into these characters and what we remember from that age of being teenagers in high school. Um, and we were awkward kids, shy kids, and lonely kids. And that feeling of discovering your people or that person that really makes you feel like you belong is just such a powerful memory for us. And I think initially we didn't set out to make a queer story explicitly. We just knew these characters and how they felt. And the more we explored them and the more we built out the game, the more we realized that that's where the story wanted to go and that's who these characters wanted to be. So it really felt like the game revealed itself to us in a way, and the story, the characters revealed themselves to us as we went along.
And I think too, like remembering the things that impacted me growing up, like playing through Silent Hill 3 with a female protagonist who
Mhm.
was like in high school. It was pretty rare for me to see a character that I felt like resonated with me. So in some ways, it was like intentional for us to, I really wanted to have women in our game. Like that was really important to me for myself. In a way, this is like the game that would be perfect for 13-year-old me. Like this story and these characters, they would have like hit home with me. Also, that they're women of color and queer. Like it's just a lot of things that I would have connected with when I was 13 years old.
We're children of immigrants. Our parents are immigrants in the United States. We're brown people in the United States. And that's like just a very specific experience to us that we don't feel like we see represented much. So it was nice to be able to just put what felt normal to us into our game.
Yeah, a lot of it was one nostalgia because it was like an era of games like we were referencing the things that we grew up with, but also practicality as far as the art style. Since I'm the only artist, I'm modeling and texturing and putting everything together, so it makes it so I can make levels like so many different kinds of levels that so you're seeing something new all the time. But yeah, just very practical as far as a small team goes.
Yeah, I think we chose this PlayStation inspired look uh, because we liked how it looked and it lined up with our team size. And then the more we explored it and the more we developed it, the more we realized it really works well with horror, especially our style of horror, which is a slower, atmospheric, ambiguous style of mood. And with a look where things are a bit low fidelity and harder to read, it really lets your mind fill in a lot of the gaps and question whether or not you're seeing something or what you are seeing. Um, so I think the like sort of lo-fi aesthetic really works in our favor. To achieve the look, we kind of thought about the pipeline that developers would go through back in the 90s or back, when making PlayStation games. So it starts with like the art style itself of like using lower detail models, lower detail textures, like limited view distance, like heavy fog. And then we kind of, on the technology standpoint, started simulating some of the hardware limitations. So PlayStation, for example, is very bad at um, fine grain numbers or like high detailed numbers. So you see several like iconic bugs basically. They have very limited number of colors that they can use on the PlayStation. So we simulate that. We just like limit the number of colors that our game can display. Our goal is always to just evoke the feeling of these things that feel iconic to us and not like, exactly one-to-one recreate them. Some of the last steps we do is try to recreate the look of an old TV by outputting the image to like a really low resolution final image and then simulating like the TV filter of like blurring things and making that TV filter look. Some players cannot play with so many filters on. So we really tried to add as many sliders as we could support to like lower or uh, disable these effects so that players can still play through our game. Because I think more than anything, we wanted this game to be a very approachable version of a horror game for people. Like we have a lot of friends and family that don't really play horror games or watch horror movies, but we wish they would. So we kind of had them in mind as we were making this game to make what we keep calling like an accessible version of horror or a cozier version of horror. We've been calling ourselves Cozy Game Pals for a while. Even though this is our first game, we had been making like game jam games on the weekends and stuff uh, previously. And we always described ourselves as cozy people. And honestly, most of our previous games have been cuter, cozier games. Um, but we think it still applies to Fear the Spotlight. Like, even though it's a horror game, like, it's very much a scary game, we think our aesthetic comes through. It is a cozier version of horror. And horror is super interesting because it's a genre that often mixes genres together. Like you can have so many different styles of horror. You can have like slasher movies, or you can have very tense dramas, or you can have
Comedies, yeah.
comedies. And we really do feel like our game feels like a cozier horror game. There's no jump scares, nothing jumps in your face. There's nothing too graphic. And at the end of the day, the game's not very cynical. It's very sweet and tender.
I was not sure that people would connect with was really the story. I think because it was, especially when it got to like Amy's side, became more personal to us. Like we just didn't know that it would be something that people would come away from and feel that they really enjoyed and that they really remembered. So I think that's something that I'm very proud of.
I think saying we're proud of everything might seem a bit of a cop out, but I think that's really true in being proud of how everything came together. I think like the direction of everything, like how we think a lot about the pacing and the flow of the game. And so there's a lot of elements that may seem quite simple, but they're very carefully chosen. So like the puzzles might seem quite simple and the encounters with the enemy might seem quite simple. We're very proud of how much the game always feels like it's offering you something new and something exciting to move at the next corner. And so the fact that you're hopefully always surprised by what's coming next or always unsure about what's going to happen next is something that's it's really hard to do for 5 hours. So we're really proud that we were able to maintain that for the whole experience.
The players we really wanted to reach were ones that like they don't typically play scary games, or this might be their first scary game. They were maybe unsure and now they're like more interested in scary games. We've gotten a few messages from players saying like, I'm usually more scared, but I played through your game and I loved it. And that was really like touches my heart.
Yeah, it's been very surprising to see the range of players that are responding to the game because we thought we were making quite a game for a narrow audience because it's a horror game, but even then, it's a horror game that is a bit more tame and kind of designed for newbies to the genre. But we're seeing that. Um, just fans of horror in general are still enjoying it. They're seeing that all the things that we like about horror are still there. Um, and then we're seeing that people, even outside of horror, are still having fun with the game. People who just like enjoying games or enjoying story games are having fun with it as well. So it's pretty surprising that so many different kinds of people are really responding. If you think you might not be into horror, I think you should really try Fear the Spotlight. We did everything we can to try to convince you that this is a genre worth playing and a genre worth checking out. So I really hope you give it a shot.
I think if you're a little bit scared, but you like a sweet story, I think you can face your fears and come out of it really happy.